Hi everyone! Today's lesson or set of notes is going to focus on cognitive development as outlined by someone named Jean Piaget. Piaget is someone in the education world that we had to learn a lot about when I was in college because he definitely focused on intellectual capability of children at different stages in their lives. So when we talk about our notes today, you guys will be looking at the different theories of cognitive development and the different stages as presented by Piaget. So here are your notes. Piaget, overall, you should maybe recall him from our speed dating activity. He was a cognitive psychologist who lived in 1896 to 1980. So he does present some research that's kind of a little bit older, I guess you could say. But he has a lasting impact. He says what a child's able to do intellectually depends on their brain and their cognition level, the ability of them to actually think through something. This makes a lot of sense, right? When we think about young children who are under 2, they can do very different things from children who are maybe even just 8 years old or 4 years old. So Piaget focused a lot on children, young children, and how they developed. And he created 4 stages of development for them. So we're going to go through those 4 stages. There's a lot of information on the upcoming few slides. So if you need to pause this, as always, please feel free to do so. All right, the first stage we're going to talk about is stage 1, or the sensory motor stage. According to Piaget, this stage is birth to 2 years old. So, during this time, a little kid, a child, will start to understand their movements and that they're tied to sensory satisfaction. This is why young babies are so into mobiles that are hanging above their crib, or they're into certain toys that they can reach out with their arms and hit, maybe in like a jumper or something. They realize that if they move their arms in a certain way, they're going to be able to make the toy move, maybe producing a sound. So it brings about an activity that has a desirable result. When young kids reach about 8 months, they start to grasp a concept of object permanence. This is when a child realizes that something is still there, even if they can't see it. So when you have an infant that's between like birth and about 8 months or so, that's why they love peekaboo, because when you hide your face, they think you actually disappeared. But after a kid hits about 8 months, it's going to be harder for them to really engage with peekaboo because they know that if you hide your face is still there even if they can't see it. So they start to grasp this concept of object permanence. Also within stage 1, young kids do have stranger anxiety. They will experience some type of feeling of fear and distress when they're confronted by people they don't know. I know when my daughter was younger, my family gave me a lot of problems because she did have stranger anxiety. And not that my family were strangers, but they didn't see her very often. So if I were to try to pass her off to a family member to hold her that she wasn't really used to, she would get upset about that. And my family would get very offended. However, according to Piaget, this is just part of one of these normal stages within, or normal characteristics of this sensory motor stage. The next stage we're going to go into, Piaget calls it his pre-operational stage. This is when kids are about 2 to 7. So they're not logical. Their mind cannot perform operations or use logic, either within a mathematical way or logical as you may think logical. Have you ever tried to reason with a 2.5-year-old? I literally do this on a daily basis and it doesn't make any sense because I have to remind myself that she is not logical. During the pre-operational stage, kids will engage in pretend play. So They will play in a play kitchen. They will play house. They will say, I'm doing this certain pretend activity, right? They also exhibit animism, which is thinking that objects have feelings, right? So this concept of my whatever is upset or happy or what have you. It doesn't make a lot of sense to us because we're older and beyond this stage, but it makes a lot of sense to them. Kids within this stage, they go through something called artificialism. So anything that exists must be made by a conscious entity. So it's like a decision that something was made. They also exhibit something called egocentrism. They only see the world through their own perspective. It is incredibly hard to have kids within the ages of 2 to 7 to think about how others feel or perceive something. This is really, really challenging for them to do. They really only think about how something influences themselves. You might say, well, that sounds like they're being selfish, and in a way, they kind of are. But according to Piaget, they literally do not have the cognitive ability to think about others and how others may perceive an action or, in general, the world. Lastly, during this stage, kids will go through one-dimensional thinking. They can't understand how something might work in more than one way. So if you show them the function of something and then say, oh, and you can actually do this, it might be incredibly hard for them to grasp that. So they're only thinking about things in one way. The next stage we're going to go to is our third stage, which is the concrete operational stage. Children enter this stage between 7 to 11 years. During this stage, they can understand that something might work in two ways. I'm trying to think of a good example of this, where you have something that can work in both ways and that children can rationalize through that. Like, I don't know, a paper clip, right? So think about one of those binder clips that you may use, and you might say, okay, well, this is for holding papers. So in the previous stage, they would say, okay, a binder clip is for clipping papers together. But if you were to show them that a binder clip could be used to, I don't know, hold together some electrical cords so they don't get all bunched, now they'll understand in this stage that you can use that in two ways. During the ages of 7 to 11, kids start to think logically. It's much easier to reason with them. And they can reason abstractly. They can think about things that they don't necessarily see or experience. They also develop a concept called conservation. So if you change the shape of an object, it doesn't change its mass. So I think about this a lot with Play-Doh. If you have Play-Doh that comes right out of the can and then you flatten it, kids during this stage will realize that it's the same amount of Play-Doh. In other stages, they will not realize that. The last stage that Piaget introduced us to is from 12 to adulthood. So obviously there's a huge variance. This is the largest stage, and it's called the formal operational stage. During this stage, we can finally understand abstract concepts and sarcasm. Don't try sarcasm on a little kid. They absolutely will not understand it until they hit about 12 years old. Now, they might be really quick and might pick up on some of your inflection, but at this stage is finally when kids will understand sarcasm. They can also reason through hypothetical situations, like if I make this poor choice at school, then the consequence could be, so I'm going to avoid doing that. During the formal operational stage, you create a sense of identity and you start to plan for your future. So this is when children will kind of form their self-concept. They will say, this is the type of person I am, or the type of person that I want to be. And these are the decisions I'm making for my future. So most of us everyone, just by sheer age, is in this stage. And I know that some of you are doing a lot of planning for your future. So maybe this resonates with you. If you have any questions for me about Piaget and his stages, please reach out, and don't forget to do those scenarios in your packet. Have a good day.